Beverly Carter. It was just another ordinary workday for Beverly Carter. She had one final house to show, a quiet property on the outskirts of town. The client had said he was prepared to pay in cash. It seemed like an effortless sale. Before going inside, Beverly phoned her husband and told him she would be home soon. But she never returned. Her vehicle was discovered in the driveway. Her purse remained inside. The house stood open. But Beverly was missing. What occurred that evening devastated her family and shocked the community. Beverly Carter was born in 1963 in the small city of Anniston, Alabama. From a young age, she carried herself with a spirit that hinted at the resilience and determination she would later become known for. By the age of 16, she was already employed as a waitress, ambitious, driven, and eager to create something more for her future. It was during this period that she met Carl Carter, a young man 3 years older. Their relationship advanced quickly, and before long they were married. Yet life as newlyweds was far from perfect. In the early phase of their marriage, Beverly encountered troubling challenges. On one occasion, while Carl was driving under the influence with Beverly seated beside him, the situation escalated. When she asked him to pull over because of his reckless driving, he lashed out violently. It was a moment that could have ended everything, but Beverly chose to remain. Not long after that event, she learned that Carl had been unfaithful. The betrayal was undeniable, and the emotional weight of it could have broken her. Yet again, she made the difficult choice to stay. She believed in giving second chances, and in time, her persistence seemed to bring results. Their marriage began to mend. The couple relocated to a quiet rural community called Scott, Arkansas. Life slowed in that setting, and the Carters began to establish roots. They eventually had 3 sons, and Beverly embraced motherhood with complete dedication. She poured herself into raising her children, making their household a place of warmth and security. Before I continue, I want to remind you that only a small percentage of people who watch my videos are actually subscribed. So if you enjoy my content, consider subscribing. It's free, and you can always change your mind later. Now let's move on with the video. But as the years moved on and the boys grew more independent, something within Beverly began to stir. While she treasured motherhood, she felt a deep urge to create something for herself, a career, a purpose beyond the confines of her home. At first, she accepted a position as a receptionist. It was only a beginning, a stepping stone. But the true spark came when she started exploring real estate. She studied diligently and earned her license. Once she became an official real estate agent, it was clear she had discovered her true calling. She committed herself to her career with passion and professionalism. Her clients loved her. She gained a reputation for being warm, sincere, and hardworking. Before long, she became one of the most trusted agents in the area. The career brought her more than professional fulfillment. It also eased the family's financial strain. They were not wealthy, but they were stable. For Beverly, that meant everything. As their 20th wedding anniversary drew near, Carl and Beverly chose to celebrate the occasion in a meaningful way. When they first wed, they had not been able to afford much. So this time, they celebrated properly, renewing their vows and hosting the kind of gathering they had once only dreamed about. It was a joyful moment, a reminder of how far they had come. But not every milestone in their journey was joyful. In 2003, tragedy struck the Carter family. Their 19-year-old son, Christopher, lost his life in a car crash. The grief was unbearable. Christopher had a wife and a child of his own, and his sudden passing left a void in their lives that could never be filled. Beverly was especially heartbroken. To cope, she threw herself even deeper into her work. She also found comfort in her grandchildren, whose presence helped mend her heart. She never ceased being a devoted mother and grandmother, and her resilience carried the family through unimaginable loss. September 25, 2014 began like any ordinary Thursday. Yet for Beverly, the day carried a small triumph. She had won a light-hearted office contest and received a $50 prize. She was cheerful, eager to bring her day to a close. There was one last property on her agenda, a house in Scott she was scheduled to show to a new set of clients. The meeting was at 6 p.m., and the buyers claimed they were prepared to pay in cash, which suggested a quick, uncomplicated sale. Beverly felt optimistic. She left the office at about 5:30 p.m., smiling, confident, and full of energy. Before heading to the showing, she phoned Carl to tell him about the appointment. She gave him the address and assured him she would bring dinner home afterward. Everything seemed ordinary, but as the hours slipped by, worry began to grow. By 9 p.m., Beverly still had not come home. Carl's calls went unanswered. He tried again and again, his anxiety rising with every minute. One of Beverly's sons went to her office, hoping she might have returned there or left some sign of her whereabouts. At the same time, Carl drove directly to the property in Scott, the last place she was known to be. What he found upon arriving chilled him to the core. Beverly's car was still parked in the driveway. As he came closer, he immediately noticed her purse lying plainly on the passenger seat. That detail alone was alarming. Beverly, like many real estate agents, followed strict safety rules. She never carried her personal belongings into unfamiliar homes with strangers. It was a safeguard she always observed. With his heart pounding, Carl walked up to the front door. It was wide open. Inside, the house was silent. He stepped in, calling her name. But Beverly was nowhere in sight. He phoned his son immediately. Yet there was no trace of her at the office either. It had already closed for the night, and the building was empty. That was the final straw. It was time to involve the police. When officers reached the property, they examined everything with precise care. But one detail stood out as unusual. Carl had entered the house before contacting authorities. In doing so, he had unintentionally left fingerprints and possibly other evidence throughout the home, compromising what was now regarded as a possible crime scene. When Carl was questioned, he explained the entire sequence of events. He spoke openly about his past, the early years of their marriage, the mistakes he had made, including his infidelity and the single occasion he had become physically violent. But those incidents, he explained, were long behind them. He stressed how much he loved Beverly, how far they had progressed, and how deeply devoted he was to finding her. His demeanor, his openness, and his visible anguish gave investigators the impression that he was not the man they were seeking. Shortly after 1 a.m., Carl received a text from Beverly's phone. It was short and strange. The message claimed that Beverly had suddenly decided to go out for drinks with friends. But everything about the text felt wrong. The tone was strange. The wording was not hers. And most importantly, Beverly did not drink. Ever. He was not the only one receiving unsettling messages. Earlier, during the search, Carl had contacted two of Beverly's co-workers, hoping they might know something. Both women also texted Beverly, attempting to get a response. And like Carl, they sensed something was off with the replies. One of them, suspecting danger, used a private office code, a type of silent distress signal between colleagues. She sent a message asking Beverly if she had left a red folder on her desk. It was their way of asking, "Are you in trouble?" But no response came. By morning, Beverly Carter's disappearance was on everyone's lips. Police canvassed the neighborhood around the property where she had last been seen. One neighbor recalled spotting a suspicious figure the previous night, a tall, slender white man with short dark hair. He had stepped out of a black car parked not on the driveway, but directly on the front lawn of the empty house. Investigators examined the lawn and, as suspected, found fresh tire impressions. It was a small but crucial clue. Attention then turned to Beverly's work computer. Luckily, a coworker knew her login details. Officers gained access to her notes and quickly discovered the entry for her final appointment. The clients she was supposed to meet were listed as Steve and Crystal Adams. Their contact information, both email and phone number, was included. But as investigators dug further, they uncovered something disturbing. The names were false. The email address was non-existent. And the phone number? It was not tied to an individual at all. It was connected to an anonymous communication service. By contacting the service provider, police managed to trace the origin of the messages. The digital trail pointed to one man, Aaron Lewis, 33 years old, residing in Jacksonville, just 15 miles from Scott. Officers did not storm his residence with weapons drawn. They were not ready for an arrest yet. First, they needed to verify whether he matched the witness description, and if so, he might possibly lead them to Beverly. Their surveillance did not take long to pay off. A tall, slim man with short, dark hair stepped out of the house and climbed into a black Ford Fusion, a perfect match to the description. Detectives in an unmarked vehicle began trailing him, but Aaron quickly sensed he was being followed. He pressed the accelerator, attempting to lose the car shadowing him. The pursuit was brief. Driving recklessly, he lost control and swerved off the road, crashing into a ditch. The collision was severe. Without a seatbelt, he smashed his head against the steering wheel, sustaining facial injuries. He was pulled from the wreckage and transported to the hospital for medical care. Initially, authorities lacked the grounds for a formal arrest. Without a warrant, their task had been limited to surveillance, watching discreetly, collecting information, avoiding direct confrontation. But his attempted escape and resulting hospitalization altered everything. After undergoing an MRI and receiving treatment for his facial injuries, Aaron took a bold step. Taking advantage of a moment when he was left unsupervised, he slipped out of the hospital and disappeared before officers could react. In an instant, the prime suspect in a growing mystery was on the run. A large-scale manhunt was launched. Local TV stations broadcasted his photo from the crash site. The image of Aaron Lewis was soon etched into the minds of every resident across Little Rock and Scott. It did not take long before he was spotted. Two office workers discussing the case noticed a man at a bus stop who bore an uncanny resemblance to the fugitive. One of them approached, pretending to ask about bus times, taking the chance to examine his face closely. There was no doubt. It was Aaron Lewis. While one of the office workers quietly phoned police, Aaron drifted away, unaware that he had been identified. His hunger led him into a nearby Subway restaurant, but his luck ended there. Several customers recognized him instantly. Unlike the office workers, they did not stay silent. They pointed, they shouted, and panic rippled through the shop. Realizing he had been exposed, Aaron fled. He burst out the door and ducked into a nearby building, desperate to disappear. But it was already too late. Within minutes, police surrounded the area and closed in. He was arrested without resistance. Back in custody, Aaron immediately began building a defense. He denied responsibility for Beverly Carter's disappearance. In his first version of events, he claimed he had not gone to the property alone. According to him, a friend had joined him, and at some point Aaron stepped outside, leaving Beverly and the other man together. Whatever happened to her, he insisted, must have occurred after he left. But investigators dismantled the story with ease. The man he named as his supposed accomplice was a soldier stationed far away on the day Beverly vanished. His alibi was airtight. Multiple witnesses and phone logs confirmed he had not left his post. The story was a fabrication, and Aaron knew it. Even then, he refused to tell the truth. Detectives tried a new tactic, pressing him for Beverly's whereabouts. Aaron remained evasive, speaking in riddles. He hinted she might still be alive, but only if found quickly. He claimed she had been left without food or water since his arrest, suggesting that time was slipping away. Clinging to that faint possibility, investigators followed his lead when he offered to show them where she had been held. He directed them to 2 buildings, but thorough searches turned up nothing. Shifting again, Aaron now alleged that someone else must have moved her. With his stories collapsing one after another, detectives turned to something harder to dispute: his phone records. They charted his movements on the day Beverly vanished, which led them to a desolate site, an abandoned concrete plant about 25 miles from Scott, once Aaron's place of employment. It was remote, barren, and hauntingly silent. Officers began their search with heavy hearts, fearing what they might find. On September 30th, their fears were confirmed. In a shallow grave beneath loose dirt, they found her. The grave hadn't even been concealed properly. One of Beverly's elbows was still visible above the soil. Her body had been hastily buried. And when forensic examiners unwrapped the duct tape that covered her head, layer upon layer of it, the reality became unbearable. Beverly Carter had died from suffocation. She'd been wrapped so tightly she couldn't breathe. When police returned to Aaron Lewis with the truth that Beverly's body had been found, he changed his story once again. Now he claimed that he and Beverly had been having an affair after meeting through Craigslist. According to him, they had arranged a private meeting on the day of her death, but things went wrong during intimacy, resulting in a tragic accident. But that story made even less sense than the last. Beverly's family and friends knew her well. She was a professional, a devoted wife, and there was zero evidence of an affair. More damningly, the condition of her body, the duct tape mask, the makeshift grave, painted a very different picture. In his next version of events, Aaron shifted blame entirely. This time, he claimed it hadn't been him at all. He pointed fingers at his wife, Crystal. Supposedly, it was Crystal who had met with Beverly. And once again, something had gone wrong. Detectives weren't buying it, but they did take a closer look at Crystal Lowry. Her phone records told a story of their own. On the day Beverly vanished, had been in unusually frequent contact with her. That alone didn't prove involvement, but it was suspicious. Roughly a month after Beverly's disappearance, authorities arrested Crystal. The moment she was taken into custody, she broke. The 42-year-old confessed and told investigators everything. She and Aaron were still legally married, but the relationship had deteriorated. Though they lived in the same house, it was only because they couldn't afford to separate. Financial stress had created unbearable tension. They both wanted out, but they needed money to do it. That's when Aaron proposed a horrifying solution: kidnap someone wealthy and demand ransom. Crystal was hesitant, but she didn't say no. Aaron suggested they target a female real estate agent. They tended to drive nice cars, dress well, and most importantly, often worked alone. They looked online and found Beverly Carter, one of the most successful agents in the area. To them, she seemed like the perfect target. Aaron called her under a fake name, posing as a buyer relocating from out of state with his wife. He told Beverly they were looking for a quiet home near Little Rock. He even chose a listing in an isolated area, perfect for his plan. At first, Beverly refused to show the house. Her agency's policy prohibited private showings to solo men, especially in remote locations. When Aaron realized his scheme might fall apart, he quickly brought Crystal into the conversation. She got on the phone and confirmed she'd be at the showing too. Reassured, Beverly consented to the viewing. The clients insisted they were ready to pay in cash, a detail that always made agents take notice. But when the appointed time arrived, only Aaron appeared. He apologized, saying his wife had been delayed. Beverly, ever professional, allowed the showing to continue. It would be the last house she ever entered. The two walked through the house together, starting on the ground floor. But when they climbed to the first floor, everything changed. Aaron struck. Without warning, he assaulted Beverly. Weakened by recent plastic surgeries, including a tummy tuck, she had little strength to resist. He bound her hands with duct tape as she fought hopelessly. He forced her into the trunk. His plan was to hold Beverly for ransom, $100,000 in exchange for her life. The place he had chosen was a former workplace, an old, abandoned building at a concrete plant 25 miles from Scott. It seemed ideal for hiding someone, but Aaron had neglected the most basic preparations. When he arrived, he discovered the building was no longer abandoned and was unsuitable for his scheme. There was no contingency, no alternate site. And now he had a terrified woman locked in his trunk with nowhere to take her. In a panic, he turned to the only person who knew the plan, his wife. He snapped a photo of Beverly, bound and terrified in the trunk, and texted it to Crystal with a single word: help. Crystal was furious. She had not agreed to have the woman brought to their home, but by the time she returned from work, it was too late. Beverly was already there, locked in their bathroom. The couple scrambled to decide what to do next. Aaron had already recorded a message on his phone that Crystal was supposed to send to Beverly's husband. The scheme was simple: make it sound like Beverly was speaking under duress, begging Carl not to call the police and to follow the kidnapper's instructions. But the recording was never sent. It remained on Aaron's phone, just one more piece of evidence waiting to be discovered. Their original plan was to force Carl to transfer the ransom into Beverly's bank account, then withdraw the money using her debit cards. Aaron even claimed he knew her PIN numbers. But there was a problem. Beverly's cards were still in her purse, which he had left in the car during the abduction. Only then, too late, did he realize his error. He returned to the scene, hoping to retrieve the cards before anyone noticed anything amiss. By that time, however, the police had already arrived. Officers were searching the area. In a bitter twist, one officer even stopped Aaron as he drove by, mistaking him for a neighbor and casually asking if he had seen anything suspicious. He acted nonchalant. He revealed nothing. Then he drove back home. Once there, things rapidly unraveled further. Thinking ahead, he recognized a new danger. Beverly had seen his face. And now, confined inside their bathroom, Beverly could clearly see prescription pill bottles, each bearing Crystal's name on the labels. If Beverly lived, she would be able to identify them both. Letting her go was no longer an option. Crystal did not want to commit the act herself. Instead, she told Aaron that Beverly had to be eliminated. And so, on a final dark drive, Aaron Lewis took Beverly from their home and transported her back to the cement plant. There, with chilling precision, he wound duct tape around her head again and again until she could no longer breathe. When her body finally went still, he placed her in a shallow grave. Crystal's confession removed the need for a long trial. She pled guilty and was sentenced to 30 years for her part in the crime. But Aaron? He clung to his fabrications. When his trial commenced in 2016, Crystal testified against him. Aaron continued his denials. He claimed he had not committed Beverly's murder, only helped to conceal it afterward. He insisted Crystal had acted alone. The story shifted yet again. He even alleged the audio recording of Beverly's voice had been artificially generated, though he could not name any software he supposedly used. As for the duct tape mask, Aaron argued it was merely to shield Beverly's face from insects during burial. The jury was not persuaded. After just 4 days of testimony, they delivered their verdict. Guilty. Aaron Lewis was sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. Yet the story did not conclude there. In 2020, Crystal Lowry filed a petition requesting early release. She claimed she had embraced religion while in prison and no longer posed any danger to society. She said she wished to repay her debt not behind prison walls, but as a free woman contributing through volunteer work. The court rejected her appeal. Her request was denied. Crystal remains imprisoned, serving the full 30-year sentence imposed for her part in the deliberate, cold-blooded murder of Beverly Carter. A mother, a wife, a woman who worked tirelessly, loved wholeheartedly, and only wished to return home that evening. Instead, her life was stolen by 2 people who saw her not as human, but as a payday, leaving behind a family torn apart forever. Moving on to the next case. Mary Goff. Just after midnight, a man in Balbriggan, Ireland phoned emergency services. He stated that his wife had fallen down the stairs and was not breathing. When paramedics arrived, they found 27-year-old Mary Goff lying at the base of the staircase, covered with a duvet. Her husband, Colin, stood nearby, saying he had tried to help her. Yet immediately, something seemed off. Mary's body was cold, far too cold for someone who had only just fallen. Her injuries did not line up with what one would expect from a fall downstairs. And Colin? He appeared calm. Far too calm. What truly happened to Mary Goff would shock everyone and expose a chilling scheme that had been set in place long before that night. Balbriggan, a quiet seaside town in Ireland, was where the Goff family made their life. Marie and James Goff were proud parents of 6 children, 5 sons and 1 cherished daughter, Mary. Born on December 22, 1973, Mary was not only the youngest child in the family, she was its very heart. Especially close to her father, Mary grew up as the typical daddy's girl, adored deeply by both parents. They were not wealthy in any sense, but they never truly went without. Theirs was a simple working-class life, filled with the things that mattered most: love, unity, and resilience. Mary's upbringing reflected that balance. She was never a difficult child. In fact, she was delightful, friendly, dependable, and easy to be with. She thrived socially and earned the fondness of nearly everyone who knew her. Although intelligent, Mary showed little interest in formal schooling. She regarded many subjects as impractical and never fully committed herself to academic study. But in 1989, tragedy struck the family at its very core. James Goff, Mary's cherished father, died without warning. Mary was only 15 years old. The loss was crushing, and sorrow weighed heavily over the household. Yet even in her grief, Mary displayed remarkable maturity. Her mother and brothers remembered her as their source of strength during those difficult months. Understanding that her father's passing had created financial strain, Mary stepped forward. She secured a weekend job to support her mother. By 1991, after completing school at 18, Mary started working full-time as a bartender. She set aside any thoughts of further education, choosing instead to earn an income and help her family manage. Life settled into a simple and steady routine: work, home, and time with friends. But in 1993, that rhythm shifted when Mary encountered Colin Whalen. He was a regular customer at the bar where she worked. 2 years her senior and recovering from a leg injury, Colin often lingered there. Their conversations began casually, yet something about him captured Mary's interest immediately. Colin came from a similarly large, modest family in a nearby town. He was charming, intelligent, and quick with humor, qualities that made him well-liked wherever he went. He had pursued his passion for technology, finishing college and securing a reliable position as a computer analyst. Methodical, ambitious, and considerate, Colin seemed to have everything in order. At first, their talks did not carry a romantic tone. In truth, Colin appeared to view Mary solely as a friend. They spoke frequently, and she became someone in whom he confided. It was a quiet friendship, growing deeper with every meeting. Over time, he became a familiar presence in her social life, attending gatherings with her and forming bonds with her friends. Despite their closeness, several months went by before Colin expressed his true feelings. Mary, who quietly held on to her hopes, never pressed him. Then at last, Colin invited her on a date. One outing led to another, and gradually, their romance began to flourish. Before long, they were introducing one another to their families. Mary's mother warmed to Colin right away. He was courteous, respectful, and clearly devoted to Mary. Her brothers, too, embraced him as if he were one of their own. In the same way, Colin's parents valued Mary's kindness and sincerity. Their relationship seemed to earn the admiration of everyone who observed it. Colin appeared to be the ideal partner, responsible, ambitious, and trustworthy. He owned a car, had a steady income, and maintained savings, everything necessary for a secure future. To Mary's family and friends, it seemed obvious that marriage was inevitable. Mary shared that hope. She envisioned the moment Colin would propose, picturing a future filled with love, stability, and shared dreams. It felt like the natural next step in a carefully constructed life together, one she had always quietly wished for. Yet behind every flawless image, shadows can linger. Almost 2 years into their relationship, without warning, Colin ended things with Mary. He offered no reasons, no explanations, no dramatic quarrel. Just a cold and final decision, one Mary never anticipated. She pleaded for answers, even silently within herself, but Colin gave her none. His silence said much while explaining nothing. The pain of such uncertainty was crushing. Mary turned inward, retreating from others. She hardly left home and questioned everything. What had she done wrong? Was it her words? Was it something left undone? The night before the breakup, Mary had gone out with her friends. Colin had called her house, and she wasn't there. That detail tormented her. Could that have been the cause? Had she spent too much time with others? Was she being punished for enjoying herself? Even her mother, who had long considered Colin part of the family, could not make sense of the sudden separation. She picked up the phone and called him, hoping for honesty. But Colin was detached, almost antagonistic. He gave no explanation, only stating coldly that it was not his fault Mary was the way she was. Mary had no choice but to mourn the end of the relationship and try to rebuild her life. Slowly and painfully, she began to do so. With time, she found strength by turning her focus toward herself. New opportunities surfaced. She secured a position working on the set of the film Rob Roy, where her natural talent for organization and coordination was quickly noticed. People respected her abilities. She was efficient, determined, and pleasant to work alongside. So much so that she was offered another position on an upcoming production in Scotland. Yet Mary declined. Even though the offer clearly reflected her professional advancement, she chose instead to remain near home. Maybe it was family. Maybe it was familiarity. Or perhaps, somewhere deep inside, she wasn't prepared to close her story with Colin entirely. And fate, it appeared, wasn't done with them either. 6 months after their separation, they encountered each other again. There were no sweeping declarations, yet the bond was undeniable. The pull between them remained. They both sensed it. This time, things were different. They entered the relationship with a new sense of clarity. If they were going to start again, it needed to be serious. From the very beginning, they spoke of the future, not as a distant dream, but as a definite plan. Mary discovered fresh stability. She accepted a position as a secretary at a law office, where she once again impressed co-workers with her accuracy and efficiency. It was a position that suited her, giving her the chance to apply her skills. Colin's own course was equally steady. His career was progressing, and in 1997, he bought a house from his grandfather. The pair moved in together, seemingly embracing the life they had once envisioned. From the outside, everything appeared promising. They had careers, a home, and a rekindled relationship. The obvious next step was marriage. Mary waited quietly, anticipating the moment Colin would ask her to marry him. But before that milestone arrived, an event cast a long and dark shadow over their lives. In 1998, Colin made a devastating choice. He drove while under the influence and collided with a neighbor's car. Inside the vehicle was an elderly couple. The 61-year-old woman, sitting in the passenger seat, was killed. Her husband survived, and so did Colin, both without physical injury. Yet the consequences could not be undone. Strangely, Colin was not charged with drunk driving. Though initially investigated, the final judgment was a conviction for careless driving. He paid a fine and walked away a free man. Throughout the trial and its aftermath, Mary remained by his side. She insisted that Colin was a decent man, that the tragedy did not define him. But troubling patterns emerged. Colin displayed little genuine remorse. He attributed the accident to wet road conditions, refusing to accept personal responsibility for the woman's death. For some, that denial was deeply unsettling. Later that same year, while vacationing in the Canary Islands, Colin proposed. The moment, much like many aspects of Colin's life, appeared carefully orchestrated. The ring, the location, every element was planned. And when they began arranging the wedding, that same sense of control carried through. Every single detail was meticulously handled. On September 9th, the couple wed in what should have been a joyous and beautiful occasion. Yet not everyone believed happiness shone on Mary's face that day. Despite the flawless decorations and the perfectly organized event, a quiet sorrow seemed to surround her. During the exchange of vows, standing before friends and family, Mary suddenly broke down in tears. Without warning, she rushed from the altar and ran straight to the car. The scene left the room stunned into silence. Her bridesmaids quickly followed, offering comfort and attempting to soothe her. Some guests thought it was merely the overpowering emotions of the day, perhaps intensified by the absence of her father, whose death years earlier had left a deep wound. Others, however, were uncertain. Mary never revealed what had caused her outburst, and eventually, the ceremony resumed as intended. After the wedding, Mary and Colin left for a honeymoon across Asia, a trip Colin had planned with his characteristic precision. But upon their return, those closest to Mary observed subtle, yet meaningful differences. She seemed more withdrawn. She adopted a conservative, modest way of dressing that was entirely unlike her usual self. The stylish and confident woman who had once expressed herself with bold choices now appeared to be retreating inward. She stopped socializing with friends and rarely went out unless Colin accompanied her. Her world seemed to have contracted, revolving solely around her husband. Her mother noticed the change right away. Mary looked unhappy, troubled in ways she could not or would not put into words. Colin had changed as well. The man who had once treated her with affection now addressed her with coldness, almost like a stranger. The difference was striking. Something, her mother suspected, had happened between them, perhaps while on their honeymoon. But Mary never disclosed the truth. Weeks passed, then months, but Mary's quiet distress never lifted. Then, just 6 months after the wedding, on March 1st, 2001, at exactly 12:16 a.m. emergency services received a call from the Whalen home. It was Colin. His voice was calm as he told the dispatcher that his wife had fallen down the stairs. She wasn't breathing. The dispatcher instructed him to perform CPR. Colin claimed he did. An ambulance was dispatched immediately. When paramedics arrived, they found Mary at the bottom of the staircase. But the scene was troubling from the very start. A duvet had been placed over her body, something Colin explained as an attempt to keep her warm. Yet she was lying in a position that was far too tidy for someone who had suffered a fall. Arms straight, legs together, body neatly arranged. It looked less like an accident and more like a setup. The position alone made proper CPR nearly impossible, raising doubts about whether Colin had made any effort to resuscitate her at all. And then there was the temperature of her body. She was unusually cold for someone who had supposedly just fallen. Paramedics found it strange. Colin, meanwhile, stood nearby, repeating the same question again and again. Is she alive? His tone was emotionless, robotic. One paramedic later described it as unsettling, off-key for a man who had just found his wife lifeless at the bottom of a staircase. Despite their efforts, the medical team could not revive her. At the hospital, 27-year-old Mary Goff was officially declared dead. Colin arrived shortly after, having followed the ambulance in his car. He was asked to identify her body. Witnesses noted that he didn't flinch. He showed no signs of grief, no tears, no sorrow. It was as if he were looking at a stranger. Hospital staff, used to seeing families in distress, immediately sensed that something was very wrong. And then they saw the scratches. While Colin was signing documents, a nurse noticed fresh wounds on his torso, deep, red, and unmistakably defensive in nature. He quickly attempted to cover them up after realizing they had been seen. This discovery was reported to police. If she had just fallen, Why were these injuries present? Why was she already so cold? And why had Colin acted so strangely from the very beginning? Police were brought in immediately. Colin told them that February 28th had been just another regular day. He and Mary had both gone to work, then attended a homeopathy appointment together. Mary had enrolled in a course on healthy living. Afterward, they returned home and, he claimed, spent the evening as they normally would. According to him, just after midnight on March 1st, 2001, he had been watching television downstairs when he suddenly heard a loud noise, a crash from the staircase. He said he rushed to find Mary at the bottom of the stairs unresponsive. Her sleeve was torn, which he claimed had happened during the fall. But his story quickly began to fall apart. During questioning, detectives confronted Colin about the deep scratches on his torso. He was visibly caught off guard. Clearly, he hadn't expected anyone to notice them. When asked directly, he was flustered, offering no plausible explanation. At one point, in what seemed like an attempt to deflect suspicion, he removed his shirt to show the injuries. Investigators were stunned. They were far more severe than they'd imagined. When pressed further, Colin flailed for answers. He denied being in any kind of struggle, denied any argument or physical altercation. Then, almost laughably, he suggested the scratches might have come from Mary's blood during CPR, and even attempted to wipe them off in front of the officers, something that only made him look more guilty. Realizing Colin was stumbling, investigators eased off the interrogation for the moment, but the damage was done. They were now firmly convinced that Colin was lying. Mary's family had begun to see through the facade. Colin's emotional coldness was unmistakable. Rather than make arrangements for his wife's funeral himself, he handed the task over to her grieving relatives. At the service, he played the part of the heartbroken husband, but those who had known Mary saw through the act. Soon, Colin was called back in for a second statement. This time, his version of events evolved. He now claimed that when he approached Mary, she had reached for him and scratched him, an attempt to explain the marks on his body. He added that she had just stepped out of the shower before the alleged fall. But this contradicted the medical examiner's findings. Her body showed no signs of recent bathing. Investigators were certain now Colin had killed his wife. But the question remained, why? Then came the autopsy results, and they shattered Colin's already fragile story. There were no injuries consistent with a fall, no broken bones, no trauma to the spine or skull, nothing that would support his narrative of a fatal staircase accident. More critically, the pathologists determined that Mary had died much earlier than Colin had claimed. Her body was already too cold at the time of the emergency call, and there were clear signs of asphyxiation. The bruising around her neck indicated she had been suffocated, not with hands, but likely with a soft object that left minimal marks. Later, investigators discovered a stretched bathrobe belt in the home. It belonged to Colin. They believed it had been used to strangle Mary. She had been alone with him in the house. There was no sign of forced entry. No one else could have done it. The pressure increased, and detectives turned their attention to Colin's digital trail. His home had been meticulously cleaned of evidence, but his work computer exposed everything. Colin, ever the precise planner, had only cleared his browsing history. What he failed to realize was that his employer routinely backed up all staff computers. IT specialists retrieved months of search data. What they uncovered was chilling. For at least 7 months, well before the wedding, Colin had been researching how to murder his wife. He had studied numerous homicide cases. One case in particular fascinated him: the crimes of Henry Louis Wallace, a serial killer who strangled several women. Wallace would cover their bodies with warm materials to delay post-mortem cooling, skewing the estimated time of death and providing himself an alibi. Colin had copied the technique nearly exactly. He suffocated Mary, placed a duvet over her body, and timed his emergency call to mislead paramedics. His motive was simple and cruel: profit. Mary held a life insurance policy valued at £200,000. Shortly before her death, Colin had doubled that amount to £400,000. The payout was valid only during the first 10 years of their marriage. Time was running out, but financial greed was not his only reason. His internet history also showed repeated visits to dating sites, many centered on open relationships and partner swapping. He had been corresponding frequently with various women. One in particular stood out: Helen from England. Colin deceived Helen, claiming to be a widower whose wife had been killed in a tragic car accident, even while Mary was still alive. He told her he was preparing to move to England, and was already searching for rental homes. With the insurance payout, he planned to begin a new life. Mary was simply an obstacle. Despite the overwhelming evidence, Colin had not yet been arrested. He likely assumed he was untouchable. That illusion ended on April 10, 2001, when he was officially arrested and charged with murder. During questioning, he denied everything. The internet searches? Mere curiosity, he insisted. The correspondence with Helen? Just entertainment, he claimed. But nobody believed him. Colin was released on bail the following day under strict conditions. He was required to surrender his passport, report regularly to the police, and remain within the country. Yet in the months that followed, his behavior began to change. He told his family that he was depressed, that he missed Mary desperately, and that he no longer had a sense of purpose. Then, in March 2003, he disappeared. He had driven to Hoth, a scenic peninsula known for its cliffs, and never came back. His car was discovered abandoned nearby, containing all of his personal belongings. To many, it appeared to be a suicide, but investigators were not persuaded. Colin did not seem like the kind of man to take his own life. The timing felt suspiciously convenient, and they were correct. A year later, during the summer of 2004, Colin Whelan was identified in Mallorca, Spain, working as a bartender. He had staged his own death and taken on a false identity by using the name of a former neighbor, whose birth certificate he had managed to obtain. Even though his passport had been confiscated, he secured a replacement by reporting the original as lost. In a cruel twist, he found employment at a bar named Karma. He was also living with another woman. As always, he was deceitful, manipulative, and scheming. His run came to an end in July 2004, when Spanish police arrested him. He was extradited back to Ireland to finally face justice. In April 2005, Colin shocked everyone once again, this time by pleading guilty. There would be no trial, no lengthy courtroom struggle. He was sentenced to life in prison. Today, Colin Whelan is serving his sentence at Wheatfield Prison. Reports state that he works in the prison kitchen and is regarded as a model inmate. Yet his behavior behind bars cannot erase his crime. He murdered Mary Goff, his wife, his partner, the woman who trusted him, and he did it all for greed and desire. More than 20 years have passed, and he remains incarcerated. There is no indication of an early release. His fate rests with the parole board, but Mary's family remains firmly opposed to any chance of his freedom. Because Colin Whelan did more than take a life. He planned it, profited from it, and attempted to vanish. And certain wounds, no matter how much time goes by, never truly heal. Moving on to the next case. Michaela Bali. In this video, we examine the mysterious disappearance of Michaela Bali. Her case has left both investigators and her family searching desperately for answers. This is a story filled with questions that still have not been resolved. Yorkton is located in the southeast region of Saskatchewan, Canada. Michaela Bali was among the residents of Yorkton. Michaela was 16 years old and hoped to become either a kindergarten teacher or a veterinarian. She loved reading, especially the Hunger Games, and enjoyed playing fantasy-themed video games. Paula, her mother, described her as quiet and shy, but also said she made parenting easy. Paula called her a sweet and caring child who always wanted to please. She enjoyed being outdoors and taking photos of nature. She also adored spending time with her younger brother and sister, to whom she was very close. At 10:12 a.m. on April 12, 2016, Shelby, Michaela's friend, received a text message. Shelby recalled that Michaela had approached her on the third day of 9th grade, tapped her on the shoulder, and said, "Hey, come sit with us." That was how their friendship began, and there were about 10 of them. They remained close throughout school, all the way through the 11th grade. Like many teenagers, they talked about everything, from family matters to teachers. Shelby didn't have her phone with her that day, so she didn't see the message until she returned home from school. It read, "Hey, I need help." About 20 minutes later, another message followed that said, "Never mind, I figured it out." The messages had been sent by Michaela. Shelby also received a call from the school asking if she had seen Michaela, since she had not shown up when her grandmother came to pick her up. Her grandmother had arrived at the school, but she didn't find her because Michaela wasn't waiting outside. Teachers and students reported that she hadn't been seen for much of the day, which led her grandmother to go inside to check if Michaela was still there. Michaela usually attended music lessons after school. The night before, she had practiced new songs for a performance. Paula thought Michaela might have gone to music class early, but when they checked, she wasn't there. Michaela's grandmother then drove directly to Paula's workplace to inform her that her granddaughter was missing. Just like every other morning, Michaela and Paula got ready together to begin the day. Paula mentioned that there was nothing unusual going on. After they got into the car, Paula's grandmother dropped her off at work, while Michaela's grandmother picked her up at school. Michaela attended Sacred Heart High School, which was located right next to the woods that surrounded Hopkins Lake. After all, she was a responsible and careful student. So why hadn't she attended class? Paula immediately sensed something was wrong when she heard that Michaela had skipped school. You raise a child from the time they're born. You know them so well. And for this to be the situation, I just knew instantly that something was off. She tried texting Michaela, but received no reply. That evening, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, RCMP, were informed that Michaela Bali was missing. Paula explained, "When I went home to grab some pictures to show the RCMP, they asked to see the box where I keep cash for emergencies. It wasn't locked, and Michaela knew exactly where it was. I panicked right there when I saw all that money still sitting there, untouched." Her daughter's phone charger was also in the house. Nothing appeared to be missing. One of the RCMP's first steps was to speak with Michaela's friends in order to piece together the last places she had been seen. They also went back to April 11th, 2016, the day before her disappearance. On that day, Michaela had gone to lunch with friends and talked about possibly taking a trip, maybe to Moose Jaw or Prince Albert. Some of Michaela's friends recalled her saying that she would be going on vacation with her family to Regina. Shelby later told police that Michaela had spoken about a boy named Josh the day before she vanished. But when Shelby pressed her for more details, Michaela did not respond. After lunch, they went back to class, and Michaela's teacher noted that she appeared to be upset. Because it seemed important, at 4:35 she texted a friend to ask for a ride to the bank. Less than an hour later, at 5:30, Michaela called TD Bank 3 times within a 30-minute period. She also checked her balance and transferred $25 to another account. Later that evening, between 8:50 and 9:30, she texted a few friends and even an ex-boyfriend. She asked a friend for help, but when the friend inquired what was wrong, Michaela gave no explanation. A boy was crying because he felt sympathy for someone, and another friend of hers received a message about it. Eventually, her ex-boyfriend said that Michaela had told him she was unhappy and was considering taking a few days off. One of her friends, Amy, stated that Michaela mentioned Christopher was coming to Saskatchewan to meet her. When the police reviewed text message records, they could see the times the messages were sent, their origins, and the recipients, but they required people to come forward and provide the actual messages themselves. From the cell phone towers, it was impossible to determine the contents of the texts. At 6:41 a.m. on April 12, 2016, Michaela sent a message to her friend Oksana that read, "Can you take me to the bank?" Oksana replied that the bank would not open until later in the morning, so there was no point in going right then. The remainder of the morning proceeded normally, and upon arriving at Sacred Heart High School, the school Wi-Fi registered her login at 8:08 a.m. At 8:21, she dropped off a binder at her locker, an action captured on the school's security cameras. Just 5 minutes later, she exited the building through the back door. There is no documentation of which route she took after leaving the school. However, CCTV recorded her at a Super C store as she walked near the train tracks. When she failed to appear for her next class, her ex-boyfriend texted her to ask why she hadn't shown up. By that time, she was already across town when she replied. She went to TD Bank, arriving before it opened at 8:51 a.m. While waiting for the bank to open, she was seen talking on the phone. The call ended at 8:55, and when the shutters were raised, she approached a bank employee. She withdrew $50 from the account. Reports differ slightly, with some stating she took out $55 before heading to Terry's Pawn and Bargain, where she arrived at 9 a.m. After some time, the pawn shop owner recalled that Michaela had asked him to appraise a ring. He noted that she was quiet and did not appear upset or troubled. He informed her that the ring had little value and that he would not pay anything for it. After leaving the shop, surveillance footage from a home hardware store captured her walking in the direction of Tim Hortons at 160 Broadway Street East. The cameras inside Tim Hortons captured her ordering a drink and sitting down to use her phone at 9:11 a.m. After that, she remained seated with her bag beside her for 13 minutes. One of her friends later mentioned that Michaela usually did not carry a bag, preferring instead to bring a purse to school. At 9:23 a.m., Michaela exited Tim Hortons through one door, then re-entered briefly to leave through another. By 9:42 a.m., she was seen walking past the home hardware store, after which she disappeared from that camera's view. Soon afterward, she was spotted heading back in the direction of Tim Hortons, passing behind the Giant Tiger store. When she re-entered Tim Hortons at 9:49, she appeared to be talking on the phone, although no call record was found. This time, she chose a different seat, by the window and facing the entrance. She remained on her phone for 10 minutes after the call concluded, occasionally glancing outside. At 10:03, she was still sitting there. 9 minutes later, she texted Shelby with the message, "Hey, I need help." 20 minutes after that, she sent a second message, "Don't worry, I figured it out." She then left Tim Hortons with her bag while still on the phone, only to return 2 minutes later and sit down again in the same spot. While still engaged in the call at 10:39, she scanned her surroundings before hanging up. For minutes later, she stood up and approached a woman seated nearby, asking how to book a hotel room, though she did not specify a location. After the woman explained that she could not assist, Michaela returned to her seat. Shortly afterward, she made another call and then quickly departed. Between approximately 10:45 and 11:55, her whereabouts were unknown. At 11:35, she sent Shelby a text that read, "I'll see you at lunch." Michaela reappeared at school at 11:59, where she informed 2 classmates that she was planning to take the bus to Regina for a trip. Later, one of these students told police that Michaela may have been carrying 2 phones at the time. Within only 3 minutes, Michaela left the school again through the back exit and proceeded to walk about a mile to the Trail Stop restaurant, which was connected to the bus station. The RCMP reported that between 10 a.m. and 12 p.m., an employee at the station saw her there. She had asked what time the bus departed. Though she already knew it was scheduled for 5 p.m., she did not purchase a ticket. A waitress later stated that Michaela appeared fine and had sat alone while ordering food. Although neither the bus depot nor the diner had surveillance cameras, witnesses said Michaela remained there until approximately 1:45 p.m. Police, however, do not believe she boarded a bus. That same afternoon, at 3:40, Michaela's grandmother was waiting outside the school to pick her up, but she never arrived. By 4 p.m., it became evident that she had missed her violin lesson. Fewer than 4 hours later, Paula officially reported her daughter missing. After reviewing the footage of Michaela, Paula remarked, "This is very out of character for her." She noted that Michaela was not behaving like she was in control of the situation, but rather seemed to be waiting. The following morning at 7 a.m., Michaela's phone was turned off. It remained unclear who she had been calling, as none of the calls appeared on her account. Most of her communication had taken place through Snapchat, Instagram, and possibly an app called Kik, which allows people to message anonymously. Because of the privacy of these apps, her calls could not be traced. Some friends also mentioned that Michaela had previously formed online friendships. A number of those friends were not local, and at least one lived in the United States. It always seemed sketchy to me that she would message guys online, but she wouldn't listen to me. It was her choice, but I think I would have done the same, Shelby explained. It took months before police obtained approval from the U.S. government to investigate her social media activity from the day she disappeared. What stood out to investigators was the absence of Michaela. Yorkton was not a large community, and missing persons or runaways were usually familiar faces. Authorities received lists from Michaela's phone carriers and banks containing contacts to investigate further. Everyone in the town was worried about Michaela and her family. As Yorkton's mayor, Bob Maloney, said, "When a young person disappears like this, it causes everyone great concern." To help find Michaela, the RCMP asked the public for help 2 days after she was last seen. A warning with a picture of her was sent out. White, 5 feet 2 inches, 125 pounds, with blonde hair, blue eyes and glasses. Wears a teal infinity scarf, a burgundy or purple coat that is 3/4 length and pants. The police heard from Michaela's friends that she had told Oksana not long before she went missing that she had about $5,000 in her bank account. After that, checks showed that she didn't have that much cash. In a March 1, 2016, Instagram post that showed her Snapchat page, she wrote, looking for Snapchat friends because I don't have any in real life. Feel free to add me, and don't be greasy. You can send me gross-ass nudes if you want to be friends. Police got a list of names from her friends. One was Christopher, a man from North Carolina who she was said to have messaged on Instagram. This was the same name Amy used when she told the cops that Michaela had told her Christopher was going to Saskatchewan. The CBC called a man who said he was Christopher, but Christopher wouldn't answer any questions. All I can tell you is that she hurt herself a few years ago. He started his short speech. I helped people who were having a hard time at the time, and I told her to stop hurting herself and look to God. Christopher was questioned by both RCMP and U.S. police, and his home was also searched. Sergeant Donis Uflak from the Historical Case Unit said that the RCMP said there was no proof that he was in Canada when Michaela went missing, and there was also no proof that Michaela might have wanted to hurt herself. Not long before she disappeared, she talked about someone named Josh. The cops didn't have a last name, so they talked to several Joshes as part of their investigation, but they didn't find anyone. Several of Michaela's friends had different stories about what she had said about her real father. 2 people said Michaela had said she wanted to meet him, but didn't know him. One said she thought he had died. Later, a guy named Rick came forward and said he thought he was Michaela's dad. But Paula said there was no proof of this. The cops didn't call Rick to let him know what had happened until 5 days after she went missing. He began to look for her on his own, and told her he hoped she was safe and that he was sorry for all the time she had been missing. His house was searched and DNA samples were taken. His mother's house was also searched, but the RCMP said there was no proof he had anything to do with her disappearance. A bouquet of roses was brought to her during acting class on Valentine's Day, the day before she went missing. There was no information about where they came from, and they were sent in a plain cardboard box. The cops were able to figure out who sent the message, and said they had nothing to do with her disappearance. To put this puzzle together, it was hard to start with, and kept getting harder. 2 of her friends told police that they remembered Michaela saying she had oxycodone, which is a strong opioid. One of them said she had shown them pills at school, and the cops did investigate. They found that the pills were not oxycodone, but Accutane, which is used to treat acne. The Yorktown RCMP gave Michaela's case to the GIS, or General Investigation Section, 3 weeks after she was last seen. The GIS is a unit that looks into big crimes and cases. Since Michaela had talked to a woman about possibly booking a hotel room, they did look into hotels in the area. However, she hadn't been seen on any CCTV video and wasn't remembered checking into a room. A lot of people searched for her on the ground and in the air, and drones were even used, but there was still no sign of her. As the months went by, Michaela's family had no news to share. They would sleep in the living room in shifts, so that there was always someone there to answer the phone if it rang. Soon, there was a sign of hope. She sent Michaela a Snapchat message the day she went missing, and it was read. After 3 months, Shelby sent another Snapchat message on the day of her graduation, but it was not opened. It was reported that Michaela had been seen in Saskatoon and Regina, but the RCMP said they had no reason to think she was in danger. Inspector Jennifer Eber of the RCMP said that more than 100 people had been interviewed and 38 tips had been received. She also said that all leads were being looked into in detail. She said that the RCMP had no reason to think she had left the country, but they had told the border force. Her bank and social media accounts also didn't give any signs and left no digital footprint for her. Ebert said, "The fact she was able to be missing with no footprint in this digital age, that is very disturbing to us as investigators." She also said that they were looking for a man who was said to have been seen leaving the bus stop with Michaela. A burning cross was on his left arm, and he was 40 to 50 years old and stocky to medium built. He was between 5 feet 10 inches and 6 feet 2 inches. They wanted to talk to Inspector Ebert to find out if he knew anything or saw anything. He said he wasn't a suspect. Later, the RCMP learned that the man had only held the door open for her and had nothing to do with her disappearance. The Missing Children's Society of Canada would let people know on July 20th that a child search alert for Michaela had been set off in Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and Alberta. Tricia Bailey, CEO of the Missing Children's Society of Canada, said that the kid's search alert was only 4 years old. It serves as a buffer between an Amber Alert and a missing or endangered child report. It also lets cops use special technology as part of the search. At the 6-month update on her case, Her family offered a $25,000 reward for her safe return. The money would be made through different fundraising events, and Crime Stoppers would also give $2,000. Paula said she hoped this would change the tips that were coming in. She also said that the community's support and knowing that they were behind her gave her hope that they would soon find the answers they were looking for. In Yorkton, there was a candlelight vigil. Paula said that the community needs a place to sort of breathe and express our sorrow. Not only Michaela is lost, but so are other kids. Every time we hold one, we hope that Michaela will be found. But we'll also hold vigils for other parents whose children have gone missing and keep looking for answers. On October 27th, Paula went to British Columbia because she had heard that Michaela might have been seen in the Burnaby area. Unfortunately, this lead, like all the others, would lead nowhere. After giving a report on the search for Michaela every 6 months, Paula would go back to Vancouver later. There were 2 possible tips about her being arrested in Vancouver. One person thought they recognized her from seeing the family's social media posts, but the reports were not proven, though she wasn't sure what would happen. Paula put up a lot of missing person signs and tried to talk to people in the area. Paula says her daughter has never shown any interest in going to Vancouver. I didn't want to miss the opportunity if there was more information to get about Michaela's disappearance, she added. We still haven't been sure that she's there at all. We're just so eager to find out what's going on that if we get any kind of tip, the RCMP will follow it up. But we also try to do everything we can. But this tip, like the others, would lead to nothing. Paula and her family went to places where homeless people hang out, and to Vancouver's downtown east side, which is said to have a lot of drug problems. She said she hoped Michaela wasn't there because she hadn't had any mental health or drug issues in the past. However helpful these tips may have seemed at first, they, like all the others, didn't work. Paula said that she wanted to keep looking for someone. After she went to Vancouver by going to Calgary and Edmonton, it is being coined. It takes a village to raise a child. But I may add it could take a country to find one, she said. She also said that this was having an effect on Michaela's family. My other children have been under a lot of stress. It's hard to imagine how much stress and worry a lost person causes a family. We're a very close family, and it's terrible for her brother and sister. In addition, she said she was going to quit her job to spend all of her time looking for her daughter. Paula told CTV News that she really thought her daughter wasn't safe, but was still alive when she went back to British Columbia to look for her. After getting tips from people that saw something at the Metro Town Mall, Paula went there to hand out flyers and talk to people. She said, "We're willing to follow up on any information we receive. We don't know why she might be here, and she hasn't said she wants to be here." Many people were in the middle of the holiday season by December, but not the Barley family. Paula told me she wasn't going to celebrate Christmas right now. There are no holidays for us, like birthdays or Thanksgiving. I haven't done anything for Christmas because it hurts too much. As of now, I don't see any reason to party until I receive news about my daughter. Michaela Bali hadn't been seen or heard from since April 12, 2017. It had been a terrible year full of pain and worry. The case was given to the RCMP Historical Crimes Unit to look into. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children said in July of that year that Michaela might have left Canada and gone to the United States, maybe to Portland or Seattle. However, there had been no proven sightings of her yet. A dive team started looking in Hopkins Lake behind Sacred Heart High School on August 15, 2017. The RCMP said it wasn't because of a specific tip, but because they needed to be ready for anything, like an accidental death. They didn't find anything. In March 2018, Michaela's family held a fundraiser called Glimmer of Hope to try to get the prize amount raised to $50,000. In the same year, Paula spoke at a child find meeting in Saskatoon. She said that Canada should deal with lost children in the same way as the U.S. It's more like a task force, she explained. There are police, members of the military, members of search and rescue, people who can help the family, and lawyers. All of them come back, but this time they search more closely and in a slightly different way. I believe we need to completely change the way we search for lost children, so that people would remember her name and face. She said that thousands of signs were put up all over Canada and the U.S. We haven't lost hope, and really in my heart, I feel that Michaela is alive and she needs to be rescued from whatever situation she may be in. Paula said that Michaela's mother told her again on her 18th birthday that they would keep looking for her until they found her. A barbecue to raise knowledge and money for the family was held on July 1st, the day before Michaela's birthday. As she often does on big days, Paula didn't sleep that night. She missed her other birthday and her graduation because of it. It's another important step forward, and you still hold out hope that today might be the day we hear from Michaela if she can get in touch with us. Try not to look at your phone all day, she told him. Paula said that about 240 tips had been sent in since Michaela went missing. She also said, "It's not okay that I still don't know where my daughter is 14 months later, and we still don't have any more information than the day she went missing. You cannot stop time from moving forward." When I see Michaela's friends on social media, many of them now have children and full-time jobs, which is difficult. I feel happy for them, yet it saddens me that Michaela cannot share those experiences with them. On August 8, 2019, Paula received a phone call. The man on the other end explained that he believed he had spoken with Michaela in March outside Edmonton's Huron Club. He had not realized Michaela was missing until he came across a post about her on social media. Remembering their conversation outside the Huron Club, he decided to call the tip line and reached out to Paula. He explained that while smoking outside, he had started talking with a woman. He believed she told him her name was Michaela. Paula recalled that he had recently been outside and spent some time speaking with her. "I think what struck him was that she didn't appear to be a girl who belonged in that environment," he noted. "She seemed kind and naive." Paula added that what impacted her most was the way he described Michaela's personality. This tip was among those Paula forwarded to the RCMP. Although Paula and the police did not always see eye to eye, she admitted she did not trust them because they had failed to uncover any substantial evidence to move the case forward. She further remarked that the RCMP felt overly formal and that their results came too slowly. As they had pledged, the RCMP stated they follow up on all tips and reports, but this particular lead did not generate additional information. The reward for information had reached $50,000, yet in 2020, it was reported that the amount was reduced by half after a donor requested their contribution be returned. In a Facebook post, Paula wrote, "I am so grateful for this individual's generosity and willingness to assist us in finding a resolution. What saddens me is not that the money had to be returned, but that Michaela Bali remains missing." Despite the reward increasing at times, no new evidence emerged to indicate her whereabouts. Families of missing individuals do not receive government funding to search for their loved ones, so they continue doing what they can through the generosity of their community. That same year, there was also a reported sighting of Michaela in Penticton. However, police confirmed that the woman in question was not Michaela, and Paula contacted them immediately. To mark her 20th birthday, Michaela's friends and family held a gathering to raise awareness about missing children in Saskatchewan. Paula stated that one of the most difficult things for parents of missing children is the fear that their children will become just another number and that no one will remember who they truly were. Around 25 people attended, and Paula emphasized their call for the government to provide greater assistance to families coping with the loss of a child. On the 5th anniversary of Michaela's disappearance, her high school hosted a vigil. It began with prayers and a moment of silence. As the event continued, individuals stepped up to the stage to share their emotions with those gathered. Despite the years that had passed, Michaela Bali remained missing. A news conference was held for the 6th time since her disappearance in an effort to uncover new leads. The reward being offered was also increased, rising to $100,000 through anonymous contributions from businesses. Yorkton's mayor, Mitch Hipsley, commented that these donations reflected the community's deep care for Michaela's return and the profound impact of her disappearance. "Everyone is in this together. We're a family. Yes, we are. We're a small town, and that's what we do," he said. Michaela Bali had been reportedly cited or mentioned over 600 times, but none of the leads had yielded results. In 2022, as part of the Homeward Bound program, the Saskatchewan RCMP and the Washington State Patrol unveiled new trucks capable of traveling from Mexico to Vancouver. Michaela's image was displayed on one of these trucks. The late Trooper Renee Pade created the Homeward Bound program in 2005 as a partnership between the Washington State Patrol's Missing and Unidentified Persons Unit and Kimway Transportation. The initiative employs semi-trailers that travel across North America to display age-progressed images of the missing. Since its start, the program has featured around 32 missing children and teenagers, 3 of whom have later been located. From 2020 to 2023, the RCMP received over 1,000 tips concerning Michaela. However, none of those tips provided new information. Her disappearance placed immense strain on her family. Searching for Michaela consumes nearly all of their spare time. They rely on social media, travel extensively, follow leads, make phone calls, send letters, and maintain a Facebook page titled, "Let's Bring Michaela Bali Home." Without her aunt's support, Michaela's younger brother and sister would have stopped playing their instruments until she came back. Michaela's little brother even struggled to pour himself a glass of water, feeling guilty because he did not know whether Michaela had access to food or drink. No child should ever experience that kind of burden. Paula explained that one of the most heartbreaking moments is when her two younger children climb onto her lap and say, "Mom, I'm scared Michaela is going to forget about us." She reassures them, telling them that Michaela will never forget them and that they will never forget her either. Paula's family has endured many hardships, yet they have remained resilient and determined. For many, her perseverance stands as an example of how to keep pushing forward, even when circumstances are painful, and to continue seeking your child. "Hold on. We're coming. We're looking. Run for home when you can," she said when asked what message she would give Michaela. Moving on to the next case. Molly Jean Watson. It was a calm evening in the Missouri countryside. Glenn McSparran was driving along a gravel road he knew well, taking a shortcut to his mother's home. But something unusual caught his attention. Two vehicles were parked along the roadside, and shortly after, he noticed something lying in the middle of the path. He stopped his car, stepped out to investigate, and what he discovered made his heart sink. This was not a random mishap. Something dreadful had just occurred, and soon the truth would be revealed. A tale of deception, a hidden life, and a wedding that would never come to pass. Molly Jean Watson was born on December 15, 1982, in Moberly, Missouri. Her parents, Timothy and Sandy, raised her together with her brother Tim in a warm, loving household. Her childhood was filled with closeness, creativity, and a unique spark that made her stand out. Diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome, Molly never allowed it to define who she was. Instead, she embraced her individuality and pressed forward with determination. Those who knew Molly remembered her as lively, imaginative, and deeply passionate. She earned a master's degree in psychology and committed herself to the field of education. Her world was rich and colorful, filled with Harry Potter books, comic stories, Disney characters, and intricate cosplay costumes. She even created her own nail polish line, a reflection of her creative drive. Home was her refuge, where she surrounded herself with books, fantasy worlds, and the companionship of her 5 cats. Her personality was powerful yet gentle, serene but fiercely authentic. In her mid-20s, Molly married, but within 2 years the marriage collapsed, ending in divorce. During that time, she learned she was expecting a child. Before her son was born, she entered a new stage of life, one that even surprised her, a relationship with a childhood acquaintance, Amber Brady. They had not been close while growing up, but when they reconnected years later, everything seemed to fall into place. Amber had also recently left a marriage. For both women, the relationship was something new, unexpected, yet deeply rewarding. When Molly gave birth to her son Declan, who had cerebral palsy, Amber stood beside her. The two faced hardships together, hand in hand. After completing maternity leave, Molly accepted employment at the Moberly Area Correctional Center. There, she encountered James Addy. James was 16 years older, a Navy veteran and a corrections officer. He was married with children. Yet despite their differences, Molly and James grew close. He told her that his marriage to Melanie was ending, and she trusted him. As time went on, their bond deepened. What began as friendship developed into an affair. They met secretly, often in motels. Molly kept it hidden from Amber. James concealed it from his wife. But secrets eventually unravel. One day, Amber saw Molly with an older man at a gas station. Suspicion became certainty. She followed Molly to a motel and confronted her. The relationship ended immediately. Now free from her past, Molly began openly dating James. She fell deeply, but those around her were cautious. Friends observed that she paid for everything. James avoided eye contact. He gave off an odd, almost distant presence. Yet Molly was convinced he was the one. In October 2017, James told her his divorce had been finalized. At 34, Molly was overjoyed. She did not wait for him to propose. She proposed herself. James agreed. With happiness and eagerness, Molly immersed herself in wedding planning. She envisioned a celebration touched with Disney magic, inspired by Beauty and the Beast, with colors of burgundy and gold. She hired a wedding planner, makeup artist, hairstylist, and even selected 2 dresses because she could not choose just one. She documented the preparations on her new YouTube channel. Viewers noticed the sparkle in her eyes, the thrill in her voice. She shared anecdotes, daily vlogs, and occasionally sang in her gentle, princess-like tone. To her, this wedding was a dream fairy tale brought to life. But as the date drew near, reality turned darker. At the end of 2017, tragedy struck James's family. His ex-wife Melanie was involved in a severe car accident. She was placed on life support. James had to care for their children, and Molly supported him. They thought of delaying the wedding, but ultimately, they chose not to. In April 2018, just days before the scheduled ceremony, Melanie passed away. Despite the grief, Molly pressed on, handling the final wedding details by herself while James focused on funeral arrangements. The situation was complicated, tragic even, yet Molly kept her eyes fixed on what she believed would be the happiest day of her life. In the middle of it all, another unsettling detail surfaced. Melanie, the woman who had just died, was not James's first wife, nor even his second. Before meeting Molly, James had already been married 4 times. So, when the couple arrived at the courthouse to apply for a marriage license, the moment turned uncomfortable. James appeared tense, vague in his responses, and hesitant to discuss his marital past. Molly seemed oblivious, or perhaps unbothered by the warning signs. She was in love, and that was all that mattered to her. But Molly would never reach the altar. On the night of April 27, 2018, just 2 days before the wedding, her body was found on a remote gravel road in Monroe County. What at first looked like an accident was swiftly declared a homicide. At the scene, investigators noted no signs of struggle and no missing property. Her jewelry was still on her. Inside her vehicle, officers discovered wedding documents, plans, checklists, and appointment notes, all marked with the name James Addy. The evidence pointed directly to him. At about 2:30 a.m., law enforcement knocked on the door of the man meant to become Molly's husband. Instead of a devastated fiancé, they were greeted by a woman, his wife, Melanie Addy, the same Melanie who was supposedly dead. Investigators were stunned. The woman answering the door was meant to have died in a hospital only days earlier following a catastrophic car accident. That entire story, it turned out, had been invented. Melanie was alive, still married to the man who was only 48 hours away from marrying someone else. Both James and Melanie were taken in for questioning. At first, detectives didn't realize they were speaking to a woman who, according to her husband's lies, should have been in the grave. They were simply trying to understand how the groom of a murdered bride was still bound in marriage to another woman. Melanie, for her part, recognized Molly's name, but only as one of James's supposed co-workers. So when detectives mentioned Molly's death during questioning, she assumed they were interviewing colleagues and acquaintances. The truth struck her like a bolt of lightning. She had no idea her husband had been unfaithful for years, let alone secretly engaged to another woman. She had never suspected a thing. James had concealed his double life so effectively that even Melanie, who shared a home and routine with him, never noticed. She told investigators that he came home every night without fail, never acted dissatisfied, and gave no signs of living another existence. Only now, looking back, did certain patterns click into place, like the fact that James often returned home about 2 hours later than expected. At the time, Melanie assumed it was extra shifts or heavy traffic. He never explained, and she never pushed. But now the web of lies was unraveling. Police uncovered that James had lived 2 parallel lives for years. To Molly, he insisted his divorce was nearly finalized. In reality, he had never filed a single document. When pressed for answers, he fabricated a tragic story. His wife had been in a horrific accident, left in a coma, and eventually passed away. It was dramatic, yet plausible enough that Molly, deeply in love, saw no reason to doubt him. With this imaginary past resolved, James accepted her proposal and prepared for a wedding he knew could never truly happen. Once the deception came to light, investigators no longer viewed James as merely a person of interest. He was now their prime suspect. Melanie provided a timeline of the night Molly was killed. James had told her he was meeting a friend at around 7:30 p.m., but he returned only an hour later, claiming the friend had not shown. Yet both Melanie and their teenage daughter contradicted his version. They remembered James arriving home closer to 10 p.m., much later than he had said. Even more damning, their daughter recalled that her father immediately went to the shower and then started a load of laundry. To detectives, that was critical. It suggested James might have been trying to destroy evidence, blood, dirt, or gunshot residue, from his clothes. His alibi was collapsing. James was taken into custody and scheduled for formal interrogation the next day. Melanie, reeling from the discovery of her husband's betrayal and lies, was released after giving her statement. She returned home to shoulder a painful burden, acting as though everything was normal for her daughter, who was busy preparing for an upcoming school dance. But behind closed doors, Melanie began her own search for the truth, starting in the attic. There, inside a trunk, she uncovered what she had never imagined: photos, keepsakes, letters, proof of a double life that had lasted 7 years. James and Molly had traveled together to Florida, to Mexico, taken vacations that he had always explained away as work-related or as trips with friends. The scale of the deceit was staggering. In front of her daughter, Melanie forced herself to remain composed, but in private, she was piecing together a heartbreaking puzzle, one that revealed not just betrayal, but murder. For nearly a decade, James Addy had managed to live 2 lives, 2 women, 2 homes, and almost 2 marriages. Now 1 woman was dead, and the lies could no longer hold. His teenage daughter, Emma, didn't learn the truth from her father, or even from her mother. Instead, she heard it from classmates at school who had seen the story online. Overnight, her private world was ripped apart in public view. For any young person, the weight would be unbearable. For a teenager still sitting in classrooms each day, the shame and judgment were crushing. Whispers followed her through the hallways, classmates stared, and as the case spread through headlines, Emma uncovered even more disturbing truths about her father's double life and the woman he had promised to marry. In her search, Emma recognized a face. She had met Molly Watson once before. Years earlier, preparing for a cosplay event, her father had taken her to Molly's house so Molly could help sew her costume. At the time, Emma thought Molly was simply a family friend. Now, with hindsight, the reality was devastatingly clear. As Emma and Melanie struggled to process the betrayal, investigators pressed harder to connect James Addy directly to the crime. At the gravel road where Molly's body was found, detectives discovered tire impressions. They matched James's car. When police examined his vehicle, they noted it was coated in mud, the same mud consistent with the rural back road where Molly had been murdered. The evidence didn't stop there. Near Molly's body, investigators recovered a white t-shirt with a custom graphic. It had been personally designed by Emma, an innocent gift from daughter to father. The shirt bore traces of gunpowder and, more damningly, Molly's DNA. James had left it behind. Though the bullet that ended Molly's life had been too damaged to match to a specific weapon, circumstantial evidence was stacking up. Phone records showed that James had called Molly on the night of her murder. A 20-minute conversation traced to the area where her body was later found. Then there was the testimony from Glenn McSparran, the man who had stumbled upon Molly's body. He recalled encountering a man on the roadside that evening, short, white, and appearing to be around 50. He had stopped briefly to ask if help was needed. That man, according to prosecutors, was James Addy. The motive, they argued, was fear. Molly had begun to suspect that something was wrong. Her online activity revealed a trail. She had searched for obituaries and hospital records for James' wife, Melanie. But no matter how hard she looked, she found nothing, because Melanie was still alive. That discovery, prosecutors believed, had sealed her fate. Faced with the possibility of exposure, his lies, his secret marriage, and a lifetime of deception unraveling, James chose silence over confession. He didn't end the affair. He didn't come clean. Instead, he allegedly plotted to eliminate the one person who knew too much. What made the crime so disturbing wasn't just the act itself, but the recklessness, the arrogance. James left a personalized shirt at the crime scene. He left his name on documents inside Molly's car. He acted as though none of it could ever be traced back to him. But the trail was too wide, too sloppy, and far too revealing. The trial began on April 26, 2021. Prosecutors brought in tire tread experts, forensic analysts, and witnesses to paint the full picture. Melanie testified again, stating clearly that she had never known about her husband's affair and that in her view, James was absolutely capable of murder. She described him as possessive, manipulative, and unwilling to let go of control. When James' daughter took the stand, her account added chilling new detail. She remembered her father returning home late, well after 10 p.m., the night of Molly's death. He went straight to the shower. The laundry machine started running shortly after. The smell of bleach filled the house. She recounted how he seemed nervous, on edge, and unlike himself. He lingered near her, quiet, almost watching. Then he walked away. Melanie confirmed that, at the time of Molly's murder, she was still married to James, still living in the same house, still believing somehow that her life was normal. And no, she had never known that her husband was using another phone to communicate with a second life, a second love. By the early hours of April 28, 2018, Melanie Addy was still reeling from the overwhelming truths that had upended her life. She had discovered that her husband of over 20 years had been planning to marry another woman, had signed a marriage license falsely claiming he was divorced, and had built a fabricated life with Molly Watson sustained entirely by lies and ultimately violence. She had no inkling of his affair, no knowledge that he had declared her dead, and no awareness that her own identity had been used to invent a tragedy that never happened. That night, James had left their home dressed in blue jeans, a black jacket, and boots. After the police departed, Melanie began searching the house the next day. Something felt wrong. She realized the jacket James had worn was missing. She inquired about it, but it was never recovered. Her investigation led her to the garage. The same garage where James had parked a maroon car, strangely placed inside rather than in its usual spot outside. A sense of unease grew. In the loft above, Melanie discovered a locked chest. Inside were a photo album and boxes filled with personal belongings of Molly Watson. The truth was undeniable. James had taken at least 2 trips with Molly, vacations he had disguised as work-related or time spent with friends. Melanie had never suspected a thing. Ironically, when she once requested to travel alone, James had objected, warning that it might tempt her into infidelity. Yet he had been the one maintaining a secret relationship. During the trial, James Addy refused to testify in his own defense. Instead, he submitted a written statement, essentially a love letter to Molly Watson, the very woman he was accused of murdering. It was a chilling gesture, reflecting either profound delusion or staggering arrogance. Later, he filed for a new trial, claiming his attorney had failed to provide adequate representation and asserting that not all evidence had been considered in his favor. The jury saw through the pretense. In July 2021, James Addy was convicted of first-degree murder and armed criminal action. He received a life sentence without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 10 years. To the very end, James Addy insisted on his innocence, promising to appeal. But prison walls hold truths that cannot be hidden. According to reports, he later confided in another inmate, admitting in blunt words that he was there because someone ended up face down in a ditch. By then, the devastation was beyond repair. In April 2018, instead of attending a wedding, Molly Watson's loved ones gathered for her funeral. The day meant to mark the beginning of her new life became the date etched into her headstone. The heartbreak didn't end there. In the months that followed, tragedy deepened. Molly's parents, Timothy and Sandy Watson, could not bear the weight of her loss. Sandy, shattered by psychological trauma, declined rapidly after the murder. Timothy, who had cared for his wife through her anguish, died of a heart attack in September 2020. Years of grief, stress, and unrelenting sorrow had broken him. Neither parent lived to see justice served. They never heard the guilty verdict. They never saw the man who stole their daughter's life taken away in shackles. Molly's young son, Jack, was left without a mother. After her death, his care became the family's priority. He was placed with relatives who provided a safe, supportive home, a small light amid a dark legacy of loss. Her brother Tim became the family's voice. In court, he faced the jury with both sorrow and resolve. He spoke of the devastation Molly's murder had caused. Not only the loss of his sister, but also the collapse of his parents under the weight of grief. He described his mother's descent into mental illness, his father's death from heartbreak, and the silence that replaced the laughter of 3 people who had once filled his life. He pleaded for justice, reminding the court of Molly's dreams, her career, her son, and her vibrant spirit, all stolen in a single selfish act. His words carried the sharpest truth. He chose to take her life without mercy, and I asked the jury not to have mercy on him. Moving on to the next case. Nancy DePriest. In this recording, we explore one of the most unsettling and twisted cases ever to emerge from Texas. A case so startling, it left the entire community in shock. Could it be possible for coincidence to place you in the wrong spot at the wrong moment? Is there a possibility that such a situation could end in tragedy? Or is our fate written in the stars and completely outside our control? Nancy did not realize that by switching shifts with a coworker at the restaurant, she was effectively signing her own death sentence. Lovelady and Janet Stump first met at the Clover Drive-In Theater located in Fort Worth, Texas, in 1967. He had been born in Louisiana, and his friends referred to him as Eddie. He served as a mechanic in the Air Force and had been stationed in Vietnam. Janet, along with her 4 sisters, was raised in Fort Worth. There was not much money in the girl's household. Therefore, when she turned 14, her mother compelled her to marry a neighbor. Janet abandoned her schooling and had her first baby, Rideau, when she was 15 years old. Motherhood was far too overwhelming for someone so young. Consequently, the child was brought up by Janet's mother. Janet left school, separated from her husband, and secured a job. At 18, the young woman attended a drive-in theater and encountered the most attractive man she had ever seen. Eddie and Janet wedded, moved to Spokane, Washington, and fell profoundly in love. The pair welcomed a lovely daughter named Nancy on March 4, 1968. Eddie, her younger sibling, arrived just 14 months after she was born. He carried his father's name. Janet struggled to care for both children because her husband was continuously away on assignment. At that time, he was in Japan, and Eddie's young wife repeatedly heard rumors that he had taken up with another woman overseas to accompany him. Janet still seemed like a child. She chose not to quarrel with her husband, so she abandoned everything, including him and their 2 children. Ed felt deceived, so he requested a divorce and then traveled to Japan, taking along his 3-year-old son, Eddie, as well as 4-year-old Nancy. Nancy's family moved frequently throughout her youth, so she experienced her childhood in many different locations. Ultimately, her father settled in Mountain Home, Idaho, remarried, and had 3 additional children. Janet, Nancy's mother, remarried once more and divorced once again. Nancy felt happy that her mother had returned, even though she had been absent from her life for a very long time. She cherished her mother deeply and believed she deserved another opportunity to be a good parent, even though they lived far apart and had not known each other before. Nancy and Janet relocated to Graham, Texas, in 1983. Graham is a small town with only 8,500 residents. That is where Nancy's grandparents resided. The girl and her mother formed a very close bond. Since they did everything side by side, people frequently mistook them for sisters. Nancy found employment as a waitress and later at a pizzeria to assist her mother with covering expenses. She worked, attended school, and also competed in several beauty contests during her high school years. She had bright blonde-colored hair and a radiant smile. She was beautiful on the inside as much as on the outside. Nancy was cheerful and outgoing, with many friends and the ability to make new ones quickly. She could chat on the phone with her friends for hours or vanish until late at night roller skating, bowling, or strolling in the woods. She enjoyed skiing and ice fishing in the wintertime. In mid-February, Nancy encountered the boy of her dreams. She was in her final year of high school. He was several years older, and his name was Anthony Todd DePriest. Todd's dream career was to enlist in the U.S. Air Force. When Nancy came home from that life-changing date, she excitedly told her mother she had met the young man she wished to marry. Janet, naturally, was not pleased. Her daughter reminded her strongly of her own youth and the first marriage that had failed. She did not want Nancy to repeat the same mistakes she once had. Janet hoped her daughter would complete high school and continue to college before getting married. However, Nancy was determined. She simply acted according to her own wishes whenever she wanted. The girl fell deeply in love with Todd. So on March 4th, her birthday, she moved in with him in Grand Bay. They were married on May 1st, 1986. Nancy left high school and immediately became a wife. Janet, Nancy's mother, tried her hardest to handle the new situation. She realized that the only way to maintain a bond with her daughter was to learn to care for Todd and allow Nancy to make her own decisions. Nancy soon discovered she was expecting a baby girl. She was thrilled at that moment because her daughter became the missing piece in their small family. Nancy always longed to be the best mother possible. Todd, her husband, also fulfilled his ambition. After joining the Air Force, he He managed to secure employment as an aircraft maintenance specialist by December. The DePriest couple relocated to Austin, Texas, in 1986. Todd obtained work at a military base there, and Nancy quickly advanced in her career at Pizza Hut. This young woman moved from a small town into the big city and grew to love it. What she cherished most about the city, however, were the people she encountered through Pizza Hut. The chain was extremely popular at the time. Workers occasionally rotated to different locations, substituted for one another, and organized softball games. Over 2 years, Nancy worked for Pizza Hut at 3 separate locations and cared deeply for her colleagues. In July 1987, Sylvia DePriest was born in Austin, Texas, where the weather was hot and humid. The little girl arrived with thick, dark hair identical to her father's. This delighted her parents immensely. Nancy was already imagining buying Sylvia a toy car once she grew older. Sylvia had just been born when Nancy received her first promotion to assistant manager at the Pizza Hut on Rainey Street in April 1988. The young mother frequently showed her co-workers pictures of her family and spoke about how Todd and Sylvia brought her the greatest joy. Those who worked with Nancy were well aware of how much she adored her family, and a few even felt slightly envious. She was also considered a wonderful manager, as she was dependable, never overly strict, and always eager to lend a hand. By October 1988, Nancy was 20 years old, and her daughter was just over 1 year old. Each morning, the young mother spent time with baby Sylvia. In the afternoons, she worked at the pizzeria. She was also among the most dedicated players on the Pizza Hut softball team. It was not because she had a great passion for sports. Rather, the young woman simply enjoyed being part of her company's life and meeting new people through such events. As usual, Nancy DePriest was scheduled to work the second shift on Monday, October 24th, but the company had arranged another baseball game for that evening. To make things easier, Nancy exchanged shifts with another manager and arranged for a babysitter to care for Sylvia. She placed her daughter in a car seat and drove to work in the morning. Todd, her husband, followed along on his motorcycle because they only owned one vehicle and needed to coordinate. The woman began her shift at the pizzeria at 7 a.m., while her husband drove to drop Sylvia off at the babysitter's. At 7:40 a.m., he returned to Pizza Hut, knocked on the service exit door, handed his wife the car keys, and kissed her goodbye. He then mounted his bike and rode off toward the Air Force Base. He did not yet realize this would be the final time he saw Nancy alive. Customers could begin arriving at the restaurant at 11 a.m., but the manager had to prepare, check supplies, and make the pizza dough during the morning. Nancy always locked all of the doors in the diner whenever she was alone. That particular morning, however, circumstances were different. Between 9:30 and 10:30 a.m., the general manager of the Pizza Hut chain attempted to call his employee but was unable to reach her for an hour. The diner was nearly prepared to open, but nobody answered the phone. Nancy was always excellent in her duties, so this was unusual. Perhaps she had forgotten that she had changed shifts. The manager decided to personally investigate the situation at the restaurant. He was startled when he discovered that the service exit door was standing open. In this instance, Nancy had arrived at the pizza shop but neglected to secure the lock. The manager examined the dining area and noticed that the restaurant floor was wet. It appeared as though either a faucet or a pipe had burst. He attempted to call out to Nancy, but she gave no reply. The dough-making machine in the kitchen could be heard operating, yet the employee was not present. The water seemed to be flowing from the men's restroom. The manager soon discovered the reason Nancy had not responded. Most likely, she had been addressing the leak. When the man pushed open the bathroom door, he was met with a horrifying sight. He bolted out of the building and immediately called for help, barely able to contain a scream. The dreadful image remained in his mind as he waited for the police and ambulance to arrive. Her light hair was streaked with red, and blood had pooled in the water beneath her head. Although the young woman was unclothed, what shocked the manager most was the vacant stare in her eyes. When the police arrived, the manager directed them straight to the men's restroom. The girl was lying on the floor beneath the sink. It appeared she had sustained a gunshot wound to the head. One officer, upon approaching the victim, noticed she was still breathing. The officer spoke to her and attempted to rouse her, but she could not respond as she began to choke. At that moment, the ambulance arrived, and she was rushed to the hospital on a stretcher. There, she underwent emergency surgery and was connected to life support equipment. Despite her critical condition and extremely slim chance of survival, the doctors continued to battle for her life. Simultaneously, the Austin Police Department dispatched detectives to the Pizza Hut. Entry to the restaurant was restricted. The police first identified the cause of the flooding. It was discovered that a blue apron had been forced into the sink drain, which caused water to overflow onto the floor. It became apparent that the perpetrator was attempting to destroy evidence. Mud-stained pants, light blue underwear, and a trash can lid were found lying on the floor near the toilet. A white button-up dress shirt stained with blood was located nearby. These appeared to be Nancy DePriest's clothing. The attacker had used the woman's bra to bind her hands behind her back. Even though attempts were made to eliminate the evidence, the perpetrator had left behind a .22 caliber shell casing. All of the physical evidence was collected and forwarded to a forensic laboratory for examination. Some things about the crime made it seem like a man did it. The police thought Nancy had probably been beaten because she was naked. There were no signs that someone had broken in. This led to a good question. Did the worker at the restaurant open the door herself, or did someone else have a key? The police found a hair that didn't have a root in the eating area. It was hard to figure out who it belonged to because of this, but it was still proof. People mostly paid in cash at Pizza Hut stores in Austin in 1988, so there were a lot of thefts there. No one was hurt in 4 robberies that happened late at night or early in the morning, so it wasn't possible that they were connected to the other crimes. Even so, just in case, the police checked the cash register and the safe in the back office. Based on the records, it was clear that the money from the previous day was missing. Detectives were hoping the whole time that Nancy DePriest, who was the victim and saw the crime happen, would live to tell them what happened and help them find the thief. That wasn't going to happen, though. Nancy was put on life support after surgery and stayed that way. Even though her body was barely holding on, the doctor told her that she was likely to die soon. It was only a few hours that the young woman held on. Before cutting her off from the machine, the doctors let her family say goodbye. The priest's family and friends were very sad about her death. Todd, her husband, was left to deal with his loss on his own. That person had a little girl named Sylvia. It was cruel to take her mother away from such a young child. The mother of Nancy, Janet, had a total breakdown. She just couldn't believe that thieves had taken her daughter. The woman cried and screamed that it was impossible. But she knew in her heart that Nancy wouldn't have wanted to be in that state. When the doctors told the girl's family that her injuries could not be fixed and that the machine was the only thing keeping her alive, they had to make the hardest choice of their lives. Even though things were very bad, Nancy DePriest was still able to help other people. The woman who died became an organ giver for people who need transplants. Her heart, liver, kidneys, and bone marrow saved someone else's life. The autopsy revealed that the person had died from a gunshot wound to the head. There was a cut just above Nancy's left ear. That part of her hair was cut short. The fact that there were no stippling marks on the wound shows that the gunshot came from a long way away. The bullet went through the back of the head and stuck in the orbital frontal cortex. The mushroom-shaped .22 caliber lead bullet was taken out and kept as proof. The doctor also said that the person who killed the woman had beaten her. DNA from the criminal's sperm was added to the case file, but it wasn't very useful at the time because offenders were usually identified by their blood type. With this, the investigation into the theft from the pizzeria turned into an investigation into Nancy DePriest's death. At first, the police thought that the victim might have known her attacker and let them into her life. The cops got to work trying to figure out if it was a coworker, friend, family member, or just someone they knew. Of course, they first checked Todd, Nancy's husband, but he had a good excuse. He was at the military base that morning where a lot of people saw him. The officer in charge of the attack on the Pizza Hut worker figured out about what time it happened. Nicole got to work at 7 a.m. Todd, her husband, brought her the car keys at 7:40 a.m. At about 8:30 a.m. DePriest called a supply company to place an order for the restaurant. And around 10 a.m. Nancy was found on the floor of the men's bathroom by the general manager. That means the crime took place between 8:30 and 10 a.m. There were stories about the DePriest case in Texas newspapers and on radio and TV news shows. The public was scared and put pressure on the police, asking them to solve the case fast and get the criminal in jail. The trouble was that in 1988, more than 40 crimes in Austin killed people, and all of them needed to be looked into right away. There were only 6 agents in the homicide department. so they couldn't do everything that needed to be done. They could be called to a new crime scene at any time of the day or night. They worked 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Like everyone else, a lot of police cops got burned out at work. This was their plan, to finish each case as quickly as possible because the people and the government said they had to. Every day, the families of the victims called the police office to find out what was going on with their cases. However, the investigation into Nancy DePriest's case took 2 weeks because the police had no leads. The lead agent was also eager to get things over with quickly. The Pizza Hut, where Nancy worked, finally let people back in. The management put in place security steps in the hopes that they would stop any other attacks that might happen. There was a guard at the front door of the restaurant who was supposed to keep an eye on any suspicious people inside or out and call the cops on all of them. As is often the case, the police hoped that the criminal would finally go back to the crime scene. They got lucky one day. Yesterday, November 9th, the guard was at his post when he heard 2 guests talking about Nancy DePriest. He carefully looked around the room as he slowly turned his head. 2 young guys were sitting at one of the tables. They had beers and talked about the crime that happened at the pizza place. After that, one of the young guys got up and went up to the guard to ask about Nancy's death. He said his name was Richard and began asking a lot of questions about the murder of the Pizza Hut worker. The guard asked Richard why he was so interested in the murder of the young woman. And Richard said that he was also a manager, but at a different restaurant. He was also working the morning shift and getting ready to open a pizzeria somewhere else at the time of the attack on Nancy. Richard must have known that the guard wasn't going to tell him anything. That's why both young guys left the restaurant before they were even cold. Everything about it seemed very strange. That's why the guard told the manager about the strange visitors, and the manager called the cops. The agent who was in charge of the DePriest case found these 2 men interesting. The main reason was that managers and shift supervisors at Pizza Hut, like Nancy, had a key that worked at all of the chain stores. This meant that people with keys could get into any Austin pizza place. The employees who seemed genuinely interested in Nancy's murder were quickly identified by the cops. Richard Danziger, who was 18, and Christopher Ochoa, who was 22, were his friends. Richard really was a boss and Chris worked at Pizza Hut as a cook. Both of them knew how the chain's restaurants were set up and Richard had a key. Police brought the young guys to the station to question them. Richard was asked what he knew about Nancy DePriest's murder. He honestly said that he had heard that a blue apron was used to block the sink in the men's bathroom in order to flood the evidence, and that someone had said Nancy was shot in the back of the head with a .22 caliber pistol. Right away, the agents thought that Richard and Chris had something to do with the attack on the pizzeria. There was knowledge the guys knew that the news didn't cover. Where could they have learnt about the size of the gun and the color of the apron? That's the question the police asked Richard Danziger. The young man couldn't remember right away who had told him these facts, but he then named an employee. For the record, the cops learned that none of Richard's co-workers had said anything like that. The only person who could have known this would have been at the crime scene. Richard said he had nothing to do with the girl's death. Danziger was also late for work the morning of the murder of Nancy, which was another strange detail. He got there just after 10 o'clock. Most people are late because they overslept the night before after drinking with their lady and a friend. That's why Richard was late. This excuse didn't really hold up. His girlfriend and friend could have worked together with Danziger to lie. After all, Richard was let go because there was no direct proof against him. Chris was then asked to come in and be questioned. The guy was shocked that the cops had reacted so strongly to their story about the crime at the pizzeria where they worked with Danziger. Even though the attack on Nancy was the talk of the town, no one was being charged. At that time, Chris didn't know that he was up against Sergeant Hector Polino, who was in charge of the DePriest case and would do anything to catch the criminal. People knew that this police officer would finish his cases quickly and dirty, even if he was wrong sometimes. The top people wanted better clearance rates, and it didn't matter how Polino got them. The sergeant knew right away that Chris, unlike Richard, could be pushed. He would break down quickly if the guys were guilty of something. Officer Polino lost his cool when Ochoa began to tell the same story that Danziger had just told. He got up from his place and yelled at the person who was being held. The sergeant slammed his fist on the table and talked about how bad Chris's future would be by mentioning the death sentence for criminals. The sergeant wasn't being a good or bad cop, which was the worst part. Polino was a really bad cop, and the young man was scared of him. The officer showed Chris a picture of the death chamber and told him he would never get to hug his family again. Then he showed the guy a picture from Nancy's autopsy, which made him even more shocked. The sergeant changed his plan when Ochoa still wouldn't admit. Polino insisted that his friend Richard planned the murder. Richard was in the next room trying to save face by putting the blame on Chris. He told Chris about his life in jail, how the other prisoners would eat him, and how he would be responsible for his friend. If he didn't tell them how Danziger killed Nancy, Chris kept saying that he didn't know anything. But being questioned for 20 hours and not being allowed to have a lawyer hurt them. The young man was mentally and physically worn out. He only wanted to go home and forget about everything like a bad dream. That's when he started to crack. Chris Ochoa told a different story and was ready to say something. The young man said that he and Richard had struck Nancy with the goal of robbing her once they had the money out of the safe. They chose to have fun and satisfy their male urges. Chris said that Danziger planned it all, and Ochoa told what they did to the girl. Then they shot her because they knew she would tell the cops about them. The officer was very interested in hearing that information. In the end, they took DNA samples from Christopher to study. But back in the 1980s, this didn't show much. The man was also put through a polygraph test, which he failed. However, even a lie detector test wasn't always accurate. For the cops, this was more proof that the person had confessed. Chris Ochoa was officially charged with killing Nancy DePriest on November 14, 1988. Richard Danziger, who was with him, was caught the next day. Now the police need to find proof that the young guys killed Nancy. Detective Polano was almost certain that he had caught the bad guys. Also, Nancy's family could breathe a sigh of relief because the killers had been caught so quickly, but it wasn't easy for them to accept the death of their 20-year-old daughter and wife. Nancy's mom, Janet, had no idea what her daughter had been through. It was painful for her to hear about the terrible things that had happened to Nancy. The woman felt deeply depressed and showed signs of hurting herself. Janet lost over 13 kilograms by smoking 4 packs of cigarettes every day. No one knows what would have happened if the dead girl's older sister hadn't persuaded the mother, who was very upset about her daughter's death, to direct her anger and hate not at herself, but at the people who killed her daughter. Dana's death also left Todd DePriest with a big hole in his heart. He had no idea that his young wife would never come home again, that their daughter Sylvia would grow up without a mother, or that his soul would stay with Nancy. At the same time, the 2 Pizza Hut workers who were accused of attacking DePriest and stealing from the cash register were being held in a detention center until their hearing. When Chris's family hired a lawyer, that lawyer didn't think the young man had been forced to admit to a crime he didn't do. The defense lawyer saw the forensic reports, which showed that Ochoa's blood samples and Danziger's hair had some things in common. The lawyer told his client that the worst part of the attack, Chris's confession and the DNA results all pointed to the death sentence. The only way to avoid it was to plead guilty. Christopher Ochoa accepted his guilt without any doubt, even though the DNA test results were not clear. In exchange for a plea deal for the murder of Nancy DePriest, he also testified against Richard Danziger, his friend and accused partner in crime. The young man was given a sentence of life in jail without the chance of parole. Danziger, unlike Chris, didn't want to admit to something he didn't do, so he had to go through a full hearing. This case against Richard began on January 22, 1990. The hair and sperm found at the crime scene were used as proof by the prosecutors. In those days, DNA comparison technology was not even close to being current, but the test did find a partial match. Chris Ochoa, who is now in court, told a horrible story about what they did to Nancy. With great care, the guy wrote down how and what they used to tie her up, who struck first, what the girl said, and so on. Nanette's mother, Janet, got very sick as soon as she heard that her daughter had asked for her life. She felt sick to her stomach when she left the courtroom because of what those horrible people had done to her daughter. She kept thinking about how Nancy begged to be saved because she was worried about little Sylvia, but all she got was a bullet to the back of the head after all the beatings. Richard looked Janet straight in the eyes the whole time, as if he didn't think he was guilty. This made Janet very angry based on Ochoa's testimony and the evidence found at the crime scene. Danziger was also found guilty and given a life term without the chance of parole. Janet and Eddie, Nancy's parents, were so relieved that they could finally sleep 15 months after their beloved daughter died. People who did wrong would have to pay for their mistakes for the rest of their lives. But things were not at all what many people thought they would be. It was terrible that the two young guys had to spend time in jail, but it was better than them dying young. Ochoa told other prisoners over and over again for years that he and his friend Richard Danziger had killed a young woman who wasn't guilty. After Janet buried her daughter, she kept having the same nightmare. Nancy in the Austin Pizza Hut, naked in the bathroom, kneeling on the cold, dirty floor while being pushed by an unidentified person. Nancy begs for mercy while crying, but no one listens. She screams, "Mom, help me." At that moment, there is a short pause. And then a gunshot is heard loud enough to wake Janet up from her nightmare. The mom could only think of one thing. She wished she had been there when Nancy was little. She should have stopped her daughter from getting married so soon. She could have been a better mother, and her daughter would still be alive and graduating from college. It looked like these dreams couldn't be stopped. Not the life sentences given to the two men who killed Nancy, not the therapy sessions she agreed to, and not the antidepressants her doctor recommended. She couldn't get better, even with time. As she always did on October 24th, 2000, the 12th anniversary of her daughter's death, Janet prayed for Nancy while standing in front of a beautiful color picture of her daughter that hung like a shrine in the hallway of her simple home. It was just after 7 a.m. when the phone rang. It was her son-in-law who told her to turn on the TV right away. Janet stood before the screen, but she could not make sense of the words. Was she supposed to endure all of this once more? She was exhausted from it all. The woman covered her face with her hands and wept quietly. After so many years, she had very few tears left. Chris Ochoa and Richard Danziger had been sentenced to life imprisonment for attacking the Pizza Hut manager. Akeem Joseph Marino, who was incarcerated in a Texas prison, was writing and mailing letters to various places. Marino sought to atone for his past wrongs after becoming more religious in 1996. He reached out to the Austin police, the local newspaper, the ACLU, and George Bush, who at the time was governor of Texas, but none paid attention to his claims. Marino had received 3 life sentences for extremely serious crimes, but he was also accountable for another death for which others had been convicted. The weight of guilt that Joseph carried had begun to make him ill. Marino, already a convicted man, provided the Austin police with information that led them to the restaurant keys, handcuffs, the .22 caliber firearm used in the attack, and 2 bags of money stolen from the establishment. Yet the authorities did not pursue Marino's statements or the evidence he presented. They simply disregarded it. Law enforcement never utilized DNA testing to link the evidence to the crime. To determine whether the shell casings recovered at the crime scene matched Joseph's weapon, they failed to perform a ballistics examination. They already had 2 men imprisoned for Nancy DePriest's murder, and the case against them appeared convincing enough. All charges against him were ultimately dismissed, and he was awarded over $5 million in compensation for being wrongfully convicted. Not only did Chris's false testimony to the police alter his own destiny, it also completely destroyed Richard Danziger's life. Richard was assaulted by Armando Gutierrez, who was also incarcerated, slammed Danziger to the ground, and struck him repeatedly in the head with a sharp-toed boot. Part of the man's skull penetrated into his brain due to the blows. The injured man was rushed to a nearby hospital, where emergency surgery removed a portion of his brain. As a result of the injuries, Richard suffered seizures, anxiety, and mental disorders, along with partial paralysis. Danziger frequently struggled to hold simple conversations or even recognize his own family. He was eventually transferred to a psychiatric prison in Kirbyville, where he would remain for the rest of his life. After that incident, Richard's brain damage became permanent. He was left disabled and in need of lifelong care. Richard Danziger was ultimately released from prison as well. He received $9 million in compensation for the damage to his name. Yet that money could not heal a young man who had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time, once strong and full of hope for the future. Nancy's mother, Janet, watched on television as Chris Ochoa and Richard Danziger, the men she believed had murdered her daughter, were about to be released. It happened on the 12th anniversary of her daughter's death. For all those years, she thought the 2 men had assaulted and then shot Nancy. Janet had attended Danziger's trial and listened as Chris Ochoa, the prosecution's key witness, described horrifying details of the crime. Could it all have been a lie and a terrible miscarriage of justice? In court, Akeem Joseph Marino confessed that he had broken into Nancy DePriest's restaurant on the morning of October 24, 1988. Janet, Nancy's mother, passed away in 2019 at the age of 69. In her final years, she fought against lung cancer. Nancy had been a young woman who worked hard, cherished her family, was kind, joyful, and full of spirit. Todd DePriest, Sylvia, and the rest of her family will always keep her memory alive. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed exploring these intriguing cold cases with me. If you found the video fascinating, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to Cold Case Mystique for more deep dives into cold case investigations. Your support helps me bring you more compelling content. Leave a comment below with your thoughts or any cases you'd like me to cover next. See you in the next video. And remember, the search for truth never stops.